Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Stalled talks, accusations traded, and endless demands made. This sums up the process being played out in Geneva. With virtual stalemate on the battlefield, outside proxies are left to make the hard decisions and compromises to alleviate and then to finally end this civil war. But do these outside powers have the political will? To CrossTalk developments in Syria, I'm joined by my guest, Dan Arbel in Washington. He is a member of the Brookings Institution and a scholar in residence at the American University. And in New York, we cross to Joe Laurier. He is a UN correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. All right, gentlemen, welcome to the program. CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Joe, as the week ends here, where does the Geneva process stand? I mean, maybe the best thing that's happened is that it's even happening.
Yeah, I guess that's it. It stands pretty much where it began. Irreconcilable differences between the two parties. They sat in the same room. They spoke through Mr. Brahimi, the UN negotiator. They spoke to each other. There were a lot of rumors that the Syrian government had decided that they agreed suddenly to talk about a transitional government. That's been shut down. So really no progress was made. No progress was expected except on the humanitarian front. There was an attempt to get aid into homes. That's not over yet, that attempt. It hasn't happened yet. So even that minor victory that they were hoping for, the negotiators, the UN, may not happen.
Okay, Dan, would you agree with what we just heard from Joe here? I mean, the best thing that's happened with these talks is that they even are happening in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's an achievement to have both parties in the same room and being able finally, after days of waiting, to talk to each other. And there was some reported progress being made inside the room. We haven't seen concrete results yet, but one has to hope that these direct talks can go somewhere and become more concrete. News from, it is a stalemate on the ground, but news from Syria coming out from Syria this morning are very disturbing. Just Syrian regime, the Assad regime, targeting different neighborhoods of rebel forces, continued strife, humanitarian strife. And just we heard here in Washington yesterday, the chief intelligence official of the administration talking about Syria becoming a hotbed for Islamic fundamentalism and for terrorism, possibly striking at the U.S.
You know, Joe, it's very interesting. I was watching very closely the U.S. Secretary of State's comments about what's going on there, and I think we all agree, whatever your political stripe is that this civil war is truly, truly dreadful. But the U.S. and its allies constantly criticize and point out atrocities committed by the Assad regime, but they're very tepid in criticizing opposition groups, and particularly groups that most people believe are linked to al-Qaeda or groups like al-Qaeda. Does this create the kind of atmosphere of compromise and diplomacy that's necessary? I guess what I'm saying, I'm putting in question the role of the United States here. Is it a fair broker?
No, of course not. They've openly declared they want Assad to go.
Agreed.
They're backing opposition group or groups. No, they're not being a fair broker, the United States. Absolutely not. I think when Kerry went to the opening session of this conference in Montreux, he again stood up and called for Assad to go. I mean, I didn't see where that helped any. We already know the U.S. position. Why gratuitously stirred the thing up? The United States is certainly one-sided on this. There's two sides to this war, and the major outside powers are Iran and Saudi Arabia. I should introduce that right now. Without those two sides deciding to make some kind of accommodation, not only in Iran, but across the entire region. And we go from Lebanon, Bahrain, to Afghanistan and Yemen. These two sides have their hands in local conflict, particularly in Syria. And until the Iranians and the Saudis can come to some accommodation, this war is not going to end unless the two parties have finally realized that neither side is going to win. But we're a long way from that. And I don't think that taking sides, and there are sides being drawn up. Russia, of course, is also on the side of the Syrian government. And the Qataris and other Gulf powers are helping the rebels. So this is a proxy war. This is an international war being fought out in Syria, a very awful war. And I don't see any solution to this until those outside powers come together. And by the way, that first day of the conference was purely symbolic. There was a big thing about whether Iran was invited or not, because they were, and then they were disinvited. It was only a one-day speech, symbolic. When they got in the room, nothing happened. Nothing's really happened.
Dan, let's get. We just heard about Iran and Saudi Arabia. Let's put that aside just for a second here. But this demand that Assad must go, that Secretary Kerry repeated on the first day and every day, is this really helpful? I mean, shouldn't we alleviate the civil war first and then try to end it and then worry about what's happening next? Because this is not helping the people on the ground, the millions of refugees, and just some of the horrific things that you can find on YouTube, on Facebook. I mean, it's first things first. Why don't we try to get the humanitarian aid, things like that, instead of talking constantly about Assad's future?
Look, I think the U.S. has come a long way in terms of its position about Assad. If the U.S. has demanded the Assad must step down or must leave, must depart, right now the U.S. is accommodating this situation in which he's actually a player in the Geneva conference, very much there and not going anywhere. And I think the U.S. Administration is realizing that, you know, you could offer his departure, you could say, you can call or demand him to leave, but recognizing the reality on the ground is that he's very much there and he may be staying. And I'm not sure everybody here in Washington would want, at the end of the day, to see Assad go. You know, I know in Israel for a fact that people in Israel are uneasy with the situation, because on one hand, if the outcome would be that Assad stays, you would have him aligned with Iran, Hezbollah, the radical axis. If he leaves and you're left with the al-Nusra and the al-Qaeda-like groups that will be controlling Syria, and that's not good news either. So I think that the U.S. has come a long way. I think the U.S., as the leader of the Western world, must demand Assad to depart. On the other hand, I think that realizing that there are constraints on the ground that may have to make him stay.
Okay, well, Joe, I think this is really kind of interesting because the man has to go, but we're going to talk to you first. I mean, this is ludicrous here, and I think this is what undermines the position, for many reasons and other reasons, the U.S. position in all of this. Because, you know, how can you just, you know, it's like going to being a monitor at a lunch table and saying when you're finished with your lunch, you have to leave. I mean, it really is kind of childish. And for allies in the region and other powers that are not allied with the United States and its Western powers, the United States looks a bit ludicrous in its whole procedural approach to all of this.
Well, look, Russia was in mourning for more than 2 years, and I wrote about it 2 years ago, that the fall of Assad will mean takeover perhaps by very extremist groups, and that they could fan out not only into Chechnya, but even into Western Europe. And Mollem, the Syrian foreign minister, made this point very strongly in his opening remarks at Montreux earlier at the beginning of this conference, that the same people that they're fighting did 9/11, the same kinds of people. Now, of course, he didn't mention crimes committed by the Syrian government. That was done by the opposition leader. But if you take both sides, you've got a pretty good picture of what's happening here. Crimes being committed on both sides. And the United States, seeking the overthrow of Assad, could open this up to an Afghanistan-like situation, the way they did in Afghanistan, the way they did maybe in Libya. All of the secular leaders that are falling, as bad as some of them as they are, all their crimes, have been a bulwark against extremism and somebody you could deal with on a certain level. And they also protected secular rights of women and other religious minorities. But the United States has consistently gone against these groups. And why? Because mostly the Saudis want these guys out for their own regional ambitions. And they're also worried about Iran, which is another backing of religious extremists on the other side of the sectarian divide. So this is the situation we've got now. Absolutely impossible for the United States to continually say that Assad has to go, when, as the guest in Washington just pointed out, they're dealing with him now. They invited him to this conference. They're eliminating the chemical weapons now. You got to deal with the reality on the ground. And as you pointed out, Peter, the first thing should be to end this conflict, end the fighting, end the killing, and then sort out the rest if possible. But that doesn't seem possible.
Okay, I want to stay with Assad, Dan. You know, why does the U.S. continue to say this? Because Obama said it? Is it hubris? I mean, or is it because Riyadh is saying this? I mean, who's leading here? I mean, this has been one of the very interesting things. I mean, the Qataris, are they leading this? The Saudis leading this? Because the United States is talking out of both sides of its mouth at the same time. That's not good for the average person living in Syria at this moment.
Peter, I have to say that let's recognize the fact. You know, Assad has orchestrated these attacks on innocent civilians is responsible for the murder, for the killing of tens of thousands of innocent Syrians. And we're not talking about Mother Teresa here.
No, but,
so the U.S.
Dan,
has a moral
standpoint
okay,
but if you bring up the word, if you bring up,
put them on an equal footing.
When you bring up the word moral, when you bring up the word moral, the United States is helping these rebel groups. Some of them extremely extreme against.
Very limited help.
No, numbers are something. I mean, you can, depending on who you want to listen to. But there's a lot of jihadists there right now, and they weren't there before. So I don't think it's very fair to say who has more moral ground here. I mean, that's a definition of a civil war. Atrocities are committed on all sides, and I am not. I want to make it very clear to my guests and to my viewers, I am not defending Mr. Assad at all right? Let's be clear about that, all right? Go ahead. You can finish up. One more minute before we go to the break.
Okay, I just have to say that Assad here carries most of the blame. I'm not saying that all opposition forces on the ground are should be our admirable groups. On the contrary, some of them are very dangerous and very vicious. On the other hand, I think the U.S. has a responsibility to be very forceful in its messaging to Assad. And I think that Russia has a very important role to play with its influence on Assad.
It brought him to the table. It brought him to the table. At least that's one thing the Russians have done here, and it's a positive thing in the chemical weapons issue as well. All right, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break. We're going to go to a short break. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the recent developments in Syria. Okay, Joe, I'd like to go back to you in New York. You were the first in the program to bring up Iran here. How tragic is it for this so-called peace process that they were invited and disinvited? And then Mr. Kerry, in his usual gaffes, maybe they can play a role on the sidelines, again, like tutoring a child here. But Iran is key to ending this civil war, like Saudi Arabia is as well. This is what needs to happen here. And what could have been in the very beginning a very big, across the board, across the spectrum conference has been truncated. And if I were the leadership in Iran, I'd say, well, you asked us, but now maybe we won't be so helpful. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, that is possible. We have to see that they are going to play a major role to end this conflict, as I mentioned before. With the Saudis, I don't think those two countries cannot play a big role in this. They're the most directly involved in arming and backing the two groups that are fighting each other in terms of the best fighters, the extremists on the Sunni side by the Saudis and Hezbollah coming from Lebanon, directed from Iran and paid for by Iran. These are the two groups that are really pulling the strings mostly. And they have to come together, and I don't know if they ever will. Now, as far as the conference goes, that was a one-day opening conference where 30 countries made speeches. I mean, Mexico was there, Canada, whatever. But the really important players there, the Saudis and the Iranians, only the Saudis were invited. So symbolically, it looked very bad that you don't invite the Iranians to come and make a speech too. But ultimately, they are going to work on the sidelines like everybody else. They're not in the room together with Brahimi and the negotiators from the government and the opposition. So all the governments are working on the side. But symbolically, at the beginning, it was important, and it was a humiliation in some way for Ban Ki-moon as well. About disinvite him. It seemed like he got played badly. He invited them without getting a written statement first. So, but ultimately, that's over that episode. What's important now is that the two sides have to realize that they cannot win this war, and that they ask their backers to come together and try to end it. And I don't think that's anywhere near in sight, because both sides still think they could win, and Assad at least could hold off But I still think there's plenty of money coming in from the Saudis, better weapons. The Qataris are playing a lesser role than they were previously, but they also have their groups there. And Turkey, don't forget Turkey's role in this, and in allowing arms to come through and to train extremists coming in there. As the head of the opposition party told me in an interview when I was in Washington, he completely blames the Turkish government for facilitating a lot of the extremists. So this formula is nowhere near end in sight, but you've got to bring Iran in at some point. And it was symbolically not a good idea, but I don't think ultimately it really mattered whether Iran came or not, whether this conference took place or not, frankly.
Okay. Dan, I mean, how can we have any kind of peace process sitting around a table when not everyone is invited? A lot of the rebel groups decided not to arrive. And then you still have Saudi Arabia, and it was revealed that the U.S. Congress is still secretly funding arms to go to these groups. How can you be fighting a war, fueling a war on, and say, we're for peace? How can you do it at the same time? It's contradictory.
Look, having Iran at Geneva is absurd, I think, and I think the U.S. rightly so objected to having Iran participate. It's like a kid that lights up a fire, then you ask him to come and put it out.
Can't you say the same thing about Saudi Arabia? Can you say the same about Saudi Arabia? No, definitely not. Saudi Arabia and Iran are not in the same part, in my opinion. I think that they are trying to do something right, trying to assist some rebel groups, opposition groups within Syria to make things right, to reach stability. Well, all right, Joe, go ahead, jump in. Go ahead, jump in, Joe.
Yeah, that's absurd. They're not interested in doing the right thing. They're interested in their interests.
Go ahead, Joe.
Saudi Arabia is interested in their interests. The Iranians are interested in their interests. The Americans are interested in their interests. Everyone's interested in their interests. And nobody's really interested in doing the right thing. The right thing would be to end this war right away, and that's not happening. But don't tell me that the Saudis are on the good side of this and the Iranians on the bad. It's silly. It's a sectarian conflict. Now, the Saudis are allied with the U.S. and more with Israel than the Iranians are, clearly. But you can't use that bias of your position and who you're allied with to talk about a war in which 130,000 people are dying, and where, as you said yourself, even Israel would probably be better off maybe with Assad staying.
Who's responsible for most of the casualties?
So that's Iran's guy. So basically you're agreeing with Iran.
Who's responsible for most of the casualties?
A lot of people in Israel want Assad to stay because of stability.
Okay, Joe.
No, we don't even know that. We know 130,000 died. Assad did not kill 130,000. That's reported everywhere. 130,000 are dead. It's never really been broken down by the UN about which side, who killed more on the other side. It's a disaster. Both sides are shooting and killing. Assad has not killed 130,000. He's killed plenty of innocent people.
Both sides are
and he can go to the Hague,
killing,
no question about it. But so could these rebel leaders. Both sides.
Okay.
Both sides should go to the Hague.
All right, Dan, at what point are these regional powers going to finally accept that the level of bloodshed going on in Syria is unacceptable? Is there a number in your head? Because it just seems extraordinary to me is that Western media is constantly saying about the tragedy played out in Syria when the neighborhood itself could sit down and probably iron this out all by themselves. They don't need the Americans there. The Americans are not a fair broker at all. They speak out of both sides of the mouth. But you could. That would be the facilitation and say, look, you guys, you have to sit down and stop the bloodshed in Syria because the agency of Syria is almost nil in this so-called peace process.
Peter, Joe, I have to say, the U.S. has a role to play. The U.S. is a responsible player here. The U.S. is a world power, and it has to be involved in this. But let's talk about the other player here, the important player, which is Russia. I think Russia has an extremely crucial role to play. It has been doing so until now, and it has to carry on doing it, continue doing it forcefully vis-a-vis all the players, because Russia does have hold cards, does hold
that's exactly what it's doing. That's exactly what it has been doing for 2 years. For 2 years.
There to take part in this. So,
2 years. Joe, for 2 years, we have seen this process. They pushed it first and hardest, much more so. Then all of a sudden, Kerry says, hey, let's have the Geneva coup. Really?
Obviously, they didn't get it done because it's still going on. I mean, they should also, the U.S. and Russia should sit together and see how they can solve this.
Okay.
And Russia is equally here, and even more forcefully has a role to play in terms of convincing Assad that the time has come for him.
It's done that for 2 years. All right, let's go to Joe. Let's go to Joe in New York. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, they have sat together, and they come up with this deal to get rid of Syria's chemical weapons. That was a Russian initiative, and the United States wisely went along with that. And they got killed. Obama administration got killed by the Saudis and by Netanyahu for not bombing, which nobody knows the consequences would have been had the U.S. intervened. You could say anything, that it would have ended the war immediately or would have spread the thing into a completely regional conflict, which may happen anyway, given, as I said before, the sectarian war, the civil war from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates River that seems to be developing, engulfing Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. They could stretch even as far south. You know, I mean, Yemen is a playground for Saudis and the Iranians as well. So, I mean, Russia did a great job there in getting, and the U.S., you have to commend the Obama administration for going along with that chemical weapons deal. And this is the way forward, with the diplomacy. And yes, Russia and the U.S. has to play a major role.
Okay.
And as you pointed out, Peter, who's leading whom? The U.S. has to put pressure on the Saudis. And Russia has some influence on Iran, I don't think as much, and try to get those two parties together here behind the scenes. Doesn't have to be at a conference. Forget about invitations. They've got to talk and divide the thing and come up to some solution here. Now, the transitional government, by the way, is what this whole thing was about. And the Iranians did not agree to communique number 1 from Geneva 1, which talked about transitional government. But nobody's ever said Assad has to go out of that transitional government, although the opposition will never accept him. And Assad will never really want to share power with the guys he's fighting. So this is a non-starter, unfortunately. Geneva 1 and Geneva 2. Ultimately, it has to be an exhaustion on a battlefield and some kind of compromise. Not in sight right now.
Not in sight right now.
By the fighters on the ground or the powers behind them.
Dan, if I can go back to you in Washington, I mean, one of the things I find extremely ironic here is that about a half a year ago, Obama was a few minutes away from saying, fire, okay? And now he wants to sit down and talk to the regime in Syria. I mean, that has got to be, the irony is just endless there. You're going to attack and you're going to kill and commit an atrocity against international law, and now we're saying we're going to sit down and talk to you. Again, the legitimacy issue is just glaring.
I don't think so, Peter. I have to disagree. I think that Obama, I think, is very pragmatic, and he reached a conclusion that he could get things done without the use of force. And many people here in Washington do believe that if Obama would not have stepped up his rhetoric and would have not had give instructions to go on a military strike, then perhaps the Assad regime would not have moved on the chemical weapons front. So I think that his position and his posturing did help in many ways reach that deal with the Russians to allow this to reach an agreement on the chemical weapons, and which is going smoothly, although most of the chemical weapons cache is still on Syrian soil. But it is a process which is going forward. I don't think it's ironic. I don't think it's. I think that Obama is very pragmatic, and he wants to do.
Okay,
to get
we're almost
this
out
done,
of time. I want to give the last word to Joe. Last 40 seconds here. The Saudis must think the Americans are fools.
Well,
at the end of the day, I mean, Riyadh just doesn't believe the Americans can drive this thing at all.
No, well, this is a really complex relationship going back to the Second World War, of course, between the Saudis and the Americans. And here we see the Saudis getting very angry when they didn't bomb Syria, very angry over the Iranian nuclear deal. And I agree with the guest that a show of force always works in diplomacy. That's from the beginning of time. You can't really do diplomacy without force. So, yes, the U.S. Threat helped get these chemical weapons out. And they've got to do more of that, more diplomacy. And the Saudis have to be told that they can't run amok and do what they want in the region. But the Iranians have to be told this, too. So until the pressure is brought on both those sides from more powerful countries like Russia and the U.S., there's no chance of a diplomatic solution. I think that the U.S. has to stand up, and Obama needs credit. He has stood up.
All right,
to
gentlemen,
the Saudis
gentlemen,
and to
fascinating discussion, but we've run out of time.
Iran
Many
nuclear.
thanks to my guests in Washington and in New York, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.
I love it.